Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of American Builders. Today I'm here with Will Accomando. Accomando, what's the right?
Accomando. Accomando's fine. Accomando's fine.
Beautiful. Will, I appreciate you coming on. Will is with a new partner of ours at TradeGuard Hourly, and we just kind of officialized this partnership within the past couple weeks. So wanted to get Will on here to one, kind of provide some information to the audience on, what do they need to know about payroll? What are the things that they probably don't know that they should know? And then go into some of the specifics of the partnership and how Hourly's payroll solutions and our compliance solutions combined are creating some super valuable propositions for both of our customers. So we'll start with just a little bit of background on you. How did you find your way into this payroll world?
Yeah, so basically I started most of my career running businesses. I ran restaurants for over, 20 years, multiple locations. At the largest point I had 27 locations. So I've used pretty much every payroll platform that's out there. Went back to school, got a master's in finance and said, I'm pretty good at this sales thing. I'm pretty good at finance. So moved into the sales world, found I could make an income and not have to work 100 hours a week. But I actually enjoy it. Payroll's the largest expense for most companies. So it's very important that you get people paid on time, in the correct manner, especially when it comes to contractors with different areas we're going to discuss today. But been in payroll now for about a little over 8 years. Been with two different companies, currently with Hourly, and rest is history. It's going very, very well, and I've helped a lot of companies streamline their operations and scale properly.
One of the unique things about Hourly and kind of what made this partnership make so much sense is the fact that Hourly was founded by somebody who comes from the construction and the trades world. Talk to
Yeah.
that a little bit and kind of how that has informed the way you guys approach, selling to the construction and trades companies of the
Yeah,
world.
absolutely. So, Tom, our founder, actually had a very large general contracting company in Palo Alto, California, lots of subs, lots of hourly employees as well. And he hated how payroll and workers' comp work together. So he is a software engineer. So he ended up building this platform from the ground up. So our whole system is organic. We didn't buy and piece it out and then, integrate different pieces. It's one complete product. So everything talks to each other very, very well, including the time and attendance and, document centers, the workers' comp integration, the certified payroll piece, prevailing wage piece. But really, he built it from the ground up, and we started initially focusing just on contractors. Still primarily our business, mostly contractors and other blue collar professions. But we've dove now into, restaurants and offices and all different walks of life.
Yeah, I think the piece you mentioned there, the initial sort of impetus for why the company was started is exactly the pain point that we're solving together, which is as a general contractor, it comes time for that premium audit, especially when it comes to workers' compensation. And now
Yeah.
you're tasked with going and finding all of your subcontractors' COIs, their credentials, their licenses for the carrier. But in addition to that, you have to then provide all the W-2s, the 1099s, make sure everybody was classified correctly.
Mhm.
And again, that was the founding story and the problem you guys set out to solve was the
Yep.
payroll side of it. And on the trade guard side, we set out to solve the certificates of insurance, the proof of insurance on the subcontractor side. That's why this partnership makes so much sense. And we're going to get into the insurance and payroll combined, how that helps with premium audits in a little bit. But let's start with just kind of some general information for the audience, the contractors of the world. Give them some insight into what are they missing in terms of quiet fees that might sneak up on payroll? What are the things that they're paying for that they might not necessarily know they're paying for?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that are in there. I mean, one, a lot of payroll companies are going to bill you separately for taxes. They don't do the certified payroll piece, and no, that's coming in more and more nowadays with our contractors because they are picking up more government work, and they have to have that certified payroll piece, and they don't want to do it manually. I mean, I have companies that are spending 8 to 10 hours a week because it's a weekly report, just putting one together, and if you miss one piece, it's those hidden costs come into play because you didn't pay it correctly. Now you're not getting paid for that contract, or you're out of compliance. Now you're getting fined. One of your subs doesn't file it correctly. Now you're liable for it. There's a lot of different pieces that come into play there. But, other pieces of just payroll alone, like time and attendance, with our system, it's built in, it's automatic, it's already included. It's not an additional cost. We lock rates for years, so that you know what you're paying out there. A lot of companies, they're going to give you a discount, give you a free month, and then, at the end of the year, it doubles. We don't charge for W-2s, 1099s. A lot of those costs come into play, and a lot of people don't realize it until they get to the end of their year, and now all of a sudden they have all these bulk costs. And then indirectly with the, insurance piece of it, the workers' comp premium. You underestimate your payroll, you base a premium based on that payroll. If you go over, now you owe a bulk payment. With a pay-go setup where we can integrate those policies into our system, you're only going to pay what you owe. You're only going to pay what you actually need to know. And I know we'll dive into that farther a little bit later on, separate class codes and things like that.
Yeah, just to kind of, summarize that up, you've got the things that, if you're talking to a payroll company, they might say, here's the fee, right? And that's the fee for one sliver of the piece that you actually need. And then
Yeah.
as the time goes on and you want to say, okay, well, now we need to do taxes. Well, now they're going to add on another fee. Now we need to do this. And they start stacking stuff on. So for those listening, when you're going and evaluating the payroll options, Will, it sounds like, those are the questions you want to ask ahead of time
Absolutely.
is what am I actually getting for this fee? And
Hmm.
what are you not telling me, I guess is the question. And
Yeah.
with hourly, it all kind of comes bundled in one.
Yeah, you want to be fully informed, before you go look at them. Everybody's going to look and shop options that are out there, and you got to find the ones that are honest with you. They
Hmm.
might be hiding something, in their back pocket, or they slide it around. It's like buying a house. They just move numbers around, and the next thing you know, you have closing costs that are 10 times as high as you expected.
Let's talk specifically about the certified payroll. This is something, I wasn't too familiar with coming in and, at the start of this partnership, but for somebody who is getting into this government work, just help them understand what is certified payroll, why is it important, and why does it matter?
Yeah, so certified payrolls when you're diving into government work, municipality work, anything for the state, a lot of information has to be included, especially when it comes to time and attendance. You got to know when they clocked in, where they clocked in, what their job role was, what the name was, what the work classification was, what their daily and weekly hours are, what their gross wages, their deductions, their fringe benefits, if fringe benefits come into play. All those things have to be included. You miss one of those numbers, you're getting rejected. You're not going to get paid for that job. And that's really, really important. And a good system like ours tracks all that information automatically.
And I think the biggest piece, like you said, is putting together these weekly reports. One, there's a time aspect to it, right? It takes a lot of time to put
Mhm.
together all this information if you're doing it
Yeah.
manually. But then
Yeah.
two, there's the risk component of, well, what if you do it wrong? Well, now you just spent all this time, you did it
Mhm.
wrong, and now
Yeah.
your paycheck is getting delayed. Talk to that a little bit. And what have you seen is typical for somebody who's doing it sort of manually? How much time are they spending on this right now?
I mean, a classic example. I got a company in Ohio that's, they have only 6 employees, but it was taking him 8 hours a week to do it. And a lot of companies, what happens to certified payroll, they wait. They don't do it weekly, and now they got to back do it because they didn't want to take the time. And now it's even longer. So I see them falling out of compliance, not getting those things done on time, or they're just frustrated and they just do it incorrectly. And with a system like ours, it'll automatically do it for you. If you're using the tools in our system, it builds it for you. You upload it, takes 5 minutes. It's $12 per report or even less if you bundle. So it really streamlines that process for you.
And then, there's the piece that you mentioned of actually getting paid on time, right? Talk to
Yeah.
that a little
Yeah.
bit. And, what does that actually look like? You file this report. If you do it wrong, you're not getting paid. If you don't do it in time, you're not getting paid. Like, what are the implications of that?
Yeah, I can't set a time frame because every agency is going to be different on how they work and what their contracts are with that company. But yeah, any delay in payment's not good. You got to pay your employees. If you're not getting the money in time, how are you going to pay your employees? Now you have frustrated employees. You're going to lose employees in that case. And some of these guys, you don't want to lose. There's already high turnover in the GC world. You want to minimize that. So if you're paying your guys on time, you're paying your subs on time, the bills are getting paid, you're not bouncing things, you have a happier crew, you have a more productive crew, and you're saving yourself time overall.
And, for the people listening, there's kind of two buckets that you might fall in. There's the GC who's been doing it for a while, or the
Mhm.
contractor who's been doing it for a while and they're just tired of doing it manually. They're tired of making the mistakes. Okay, well, understand that there's solutions out there that make that process easier. And for the folks who are just now getting into some of this government work, understand that if you do it the right way from the get-go, your life will be significantly easier. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about the prevailing wages. It's a
Mhm.
similar kind of concept, right? It touches on the same sort of government work aspect. But again, what is it? How does it work? And why is this important?
Yeah, so when you're talking about prevailing wages, there's a wage that has to be paid based on that project, based on whatever agencies, denoting that project at the time. So say it's like a carpenter. The prevailing wage is $55 an hour. So you have to pay them $55 an hour. But there's fringe benefits involved. So the base wage is $40 an hour. That fringe benefit is $15 an hour. That equals the $55 an hour. So what it does is it prevents contractors from undercutting the labor markets in that area. So they already set a specific wage for that specific job. And if you're not paying that, you can be fined. And it keeps everything fair, basically, in those areas. It's ensuring that your workers have fair compensation, when they're getting paid.
Absolutely. And then I know this is something that you touched on in just previous conversations of ours. If you have two different type, one person doing two types of
Yeah.
classified work, I just explain kind of what that nuance is and how you guys handle that.
Yeah, so wrong classification is a piece of that prevailing wage. If you're not classifying the worker correctly, you might be paying too much, you may be paying too little. So in our system, what it tracks is not only the job role. So say you have a contractor and one does concrete work part of the day, and then later in the day they're doing carpentry. It's two different job roles, two different pay rates, two different class codes. Our system and where insurance comes into play. We're tracking all of that information and they can actually switch automatically from their handheld device between those roles, or you can record it manually, but it's going to track all of that information on each line item. So now you have them classified correctly, you're paying them the correct wage, and it's recording for your premium for insurance the right rate for the right class code. Where that in the long run is going to save you money and it's going to save you time. Because our system, again, will do it automatically for you. You don't have to go in and manually redo everything. And that, again, certified payroll, prevailing wages, they're very specific. And our system will automatically track all of that for you. So it's one button to push, it spits out the report, you upload it into our partner site, and it gives you that certified payroll report in less than 5 minutes.
And I want to just touch on some of the actual penalties. I did some research ahead of this and like I tried to understand. Okay, well, what actually happens if you do this wrong? There's part of it is first you might have to pay back some of these wages. So if you underpay somebody, you might have to pay them back to sort of resolve that conflict. There's
Mm-hmm.
even civil money penalties. I think
Yep,
up to $13,500 per
exactly.
violation. That was as of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
That's assessed per worker per pay period. So obviously that
Exactly.
stacks across multiple crews. And then the government can even withhold their payment, like we've talked about. So if you haven't done this properly, and the government is the one who's supposed to pay you out, so you can pay your employees, pay your subs. If you're not doing that properly, that can get sort of withheld. And then there's a one piece here about debarment when you're barred from bidding on any federally funded work. So if you continually do this wrong over and over again, you can then just be fully prevented from bidding on any of these jobs. It looks like up to 3 years, two violations in a 5 year window can trigger that. So if you do
Absolutely.
that twice wrong in a 5 year period, you might be banned from doing that work altogether. And if you're somebody who relies heavily on this, that could be catastrophic to the business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, not only that, it's businesses that want to get into that. I mean, that's where
Right.
money is. The government jobs give you a lot of revenue. So if you want to dive into that, we can help you get into that, and do it correctly from the get-go. Like you said, you can get banned from that work or you can gain that work. If you do it correctly, you're going to get more contracts. So now you're increasing your revenue even further. Now you're able to bring on more people, bigger jobs, more bigger paychecks, and that's where most companies want to go. The sky's the limit at that point. So that's what our system helps develop or maintain when you're using our system and also a system like yours.
And before we kind of move on to the next topic, I want to just touch on a piece that I learned, which is this doesn't just apply to, let's say, an individual contractor working on a job. If you're a GC, you are also liable for your subcontractors
Absolutely.
to be doing this properly, right? So again, this
Absolutely.
touches on this whole world from as a general contractor, whether it's insurance, whether it's the government enforcing it, you have a lot of liability that exists when you're relying on the subcontractors to do the work properly, which just kind of, improves the value of the tools like hourly and like TradeGuard. Let's talk some of the costly mistakes that come with payroll. I think the first one is taxes, obviously
Mhm.
outside of the insurance, but let's touch on a few of these. We'll start with taxes. How do you guys go about taxes? What are some of the mistakes that you've seen that cost people?
Lots of things. And to get over it real briefly, if you file your taxes late, you're going to get fined. Then you got to do amendments, and then fees and fines come into play with those amendments. We avoid that because we have a very accurate tax engine. Other things, you're not paying certain taxes. I've had a lot of payroll companies get transferred over into us, and they're not paying. Indiana's a big one. There's a bunch of local municipality taxes. If you're not paying those, now your employees aren't paying their taxes, which obviously it's tax fraud. So our system has caught a lot of those errors, implemented the right policies, put the right codes in the right place, and now they're paying the taxes correctly. So it's not just that we set them up correctly. We might catch errors when you come from another payroll company, which saves you again time, money, and fines.
I think that was a perfect way to sum it up. There's like the three buckets that
Mhm.
if you're doing this wrong, that can cost you. There's the time of one, you're doing it manually yourself. That's costing you time. If you make a mistake, now you have to redo it. That's costing you time, which obviously time costs you money. And then there's the big one, which is the fines. And so doing
Mhm.
this right from the get-go avoids those three. So if you're kind of thinking about, what am I actually going to be preventing by signing up for a platform like Hourly, a platform like TradeGuards? It's the time, it's the money, and it's the fees.
Absolutely.
The time theft piece of things. You guys have a super unique feature in terms of the GPS tracking. Talk to that a little bit. I think this is probably, fairly common, especially in the trades and the contractors of the
Mhm.
world. You've got buddy punching, padded timesheets. Just touch on that a little bit. And, what have
Yeah.
you seen and how do you guys prevent that?
Definitely. This is our biggest differentiator with other payroll companies. As far as I know, at this point, we're the only payroll company that has full GPS tracking. So not only can we show where your employee clocked in, which we can also geofence so they can only clock in when they get to that location and clock out before they leave, or it alerts you if they don't clock out. But we have full GPS tracking. So once they clock in, it's going to drop a pin every 100 to 150 feet throughout the day, everywhere they go with their phone. A lot of GCs use truck tracking. That's great. Well, they can park the truck and they can go somewhere else. No one leaves their phone behind. So it's going to track exactly where they went. Now, it's not in real time yet, something we are working towards. However, it gives a shift review per individual, per day, per shift. And you can actually pulls up a map and it will show you exactly where they went. When that comes into play with insurance, guy's supposed to be at this job, says he got hurt here, but the whole thing showed he wasn't there all day long. Now you have something to bring to a claims adjuster. You have actual documentation. Can never say it's going to work, but it's more than you would have had if you're using a different system.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's the aspect of just, as a GC running a business, you want to make sure you can, your guys are where they say they are. But like you said, there's a
Mhm.
liability aspect to it as well. If something goes wrong, you have the evidence to support that. You see it all the time, especially on the workers' comp side, people having false claims. I saw a video the other day of some guy, there's a security camera in the office. The
Hmm.
guy's standing there, looks around, and he just like does a fake slip and
Yep.
fall trying to get a workers' comp claim. Luckily, that person had a camera in the
Mhm.
office, and luckily, if you're using hourly, you have that GPS tracking to back things
Additional
up.
safeguards. Additional safeguards.
Exactly. Now, 1099s versus W2. This is something that I think a lot of people in construction kind of they do wrong, if you will. And there's some benefits to it, right? Obviously, you have some tax implications if you're paying 1099 versus W2, but what have you seen? How does this play out usually when you're talking to people and just talk to a little bit about the errors or the what could go wrong if you're misclassifying these 1099 versus W2?
So that's a big one. There's a lot of people that class that they want to classify everybody as a 1099 because they don't want to pay, the taxes, on that as an employer. So the problem is, majority of time they're actually W-2 employees. If you're telling them where to go, you're dictating their hours, you're dictating the job, they're using your tools, they're a W-2 employee. If you're just telling them, hey, go to this job and when you're done, that's more of a 1099 employee. But again, if they're using your equipment, that can fall into W-2. So it's a very, very fine line. And I see a lot of startups that have everybody 1099 and then they come in, they're like, well, I tell them when to get there, I tell them what to do. And I'm like, bro, that's a W-2 employee. You got to have them classified right. Because now you're looking at fines. Again, that's tax evasion. In the grand scheme of things, it's tax evasion. Your employees want to get paid correctly. They could have tax issues if they're not classified correctly, and they owe a big lump sum if they're a 1099 at the end of the year. And if they haven't been saving, they might owe the government and now they're getting fined, and interest is being added in. So really designating them the correct way from day one, which we can help advise. We're not CPAs. That's really a CPA question. However, we can give some guidance in that aspect or refer you to one of our partners that can help out in that classification area.
Yeah, I mean, talk to that a little bit more. What do you, because like you said, if you're the business owner, you don't want to do this, right? It's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to pay these taxes.
Yeah.
How do you help people understand, when it makes sense to switch over, what the implications are? Like, what does that conversation look like?
Again, with us, I have a big broker network that I've built, and most of our territory sales managers here do have broker networks or people that we trust and have built over the years that give the same level of service that we do. Know their field inside and out. They're specialists, so that's really we can advise like, hey, this sounds like a W-2, but here's somebody you can talk to really get advice. Or if they have a CPA, go to your CPA, explain the situation, ask them because they're really the specialists. We stay out of that portion of it because we don't want to come out of compliance when we're telling somebody. Usually I can give enough guidance. I mean, it's most of the time it's blatantly obvious,
Right.
but again, you always refer them back to a specialized source that says, this is the defining factor. This is how we're going to tax. And usually that's a CPA that's going to give them that advice.
Yeah, and I think just to close this side out on the taxes, and it's like, okay, well, who's going to come after me if I'm 1099 versus W-2? Who's knocking on my door? You could have IRS, you could have the state, you could have your workers' comp carrier. Like, there's a lot of ways, and
Mhm.
especially when at the end of every year, all three of those entities are going to be looking in. And so, if
Yeah.
you're doing this wrong for a long enough period of time, it's going to come back to bite you.
It's not if, it's when.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. So let's talk about the insurance side.
Mhm.
I'll do some minute to explain here for a sec before we get into it. The typical audit situation. So how this works when it comes to workers' compensation, like you mentioned earlier, at the beginning of the year, typically you're going to tell the carrier, here's how much payroll we expect to have, and here's the classification of that payroll. Carrier is going to look at that and say, okay, you're paying this classification, meaning carpentry, this much per year. They then basically bucket that up and assign a price to that. If you go over or under at the end of the year, that comes out during the audit. They're going to look and say, okay, send me all of your W-2s, your 1099s. We'll see how things are classified and check if you overestimated or underestimated. That's on the payroll side. On the compliance side, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up with the 1099 things that we were discussing. If you have somebody who is a 1099 that is working under you, a subcontractor, and they do not have insurance, or you do not have proof that they have insurance, during that audit period, the carrier is going to look at that and they're going to say, this person doesn't have insurance. That means they are going to treat it as basically one of your employees. So let's say you paid a subcontractor $50,000 throughout the year. You didn't project that at the start of the year. That subcontractor didn't have insurance. It comes out during the audit. Carrier is going to look at that, move that $50,000 to your payroll, which obviously is going to increase the premium. That's when you get hit with the fine. So just from a logistics perspective and just kind of setting a foundation, that is how the audit works.
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to kick it over to you so you can talk about how hourly helps with this on the payroll side, and specifically what it looks like throughout the year, the pay go option, and then that kind of one-click premium audit.
Yeah, so definitely. So, what we do differently than most payroll providers is that we track not only the job role, the pay rate, but also the class code. And it does it very, very accurately. During your policy period, it's tracking all of that data and it's compiling it. But we set most of our systems are going to be set up as a pay-go option. We're workers' comp carrier agnostic here at Hourly. So we don't have internal broker teams where we're limited on our scope. So we can set up a pay-go option. Pay-go means you're paying per payroll period based on your actual payroll data. So at the end of the year, you're not going to go over. If anything, you're going to go under. And where the underage comes in, if you have that employee that has two different class codes, so they're doing carpentry and concrete work, two different class codes, two different risks, it's going to track all that data. Now, with insurance company policies, it's always going to bill at the higher percentage for that policy period. Whatever rate is for that one employee is higher, it's going to be billed at that. However, it's going to track all those lower percentages. So at the end of the year, hypothetically, you will get a refund for that difference. Our system is very, very accurate at tracking those codes. And that's why a lot of contractors do come to us because they do have, guys that work three or four different jobs on the site. And again, it's all handheld mobile device. They're able to flip right between them as they switch them. Or you can go in manually and just add and subtract them throughout the day or change the class codes for those different policy periods or different time periods.
And the beauty of the pay-go option, like you mentioned, is you're not estimating and then giving a big chunk away and
Yeah.
then waiting 12 months to figure out if you were over or under. You are paying the premium as you're paying the payroll. So from a cash flow perspective, this is a great tool for contractors.
And also benefit of that, it typically waives the deposit. So if you're set up as a pay-go, you waive the deposit. It automatically reports all of your payroll, so you don't have to manually report your payroll. And it's the one-click audit in our system. So it's one click, sends the audit report automatically to the carrier. Yes, there could be an audit, but as long as all that data is correct, it's going to be very minimal. Unless, again, you put in bad information out requires, big audit. So it is what you put into it. But if you're using our time and attendance and you're using the tools, all that information should be correct. One click, very streamlined audit process with all of our carriers.
And now this is where TradeGuard comes in. So, when you're looking at an audit, the carrier's looking at the audit. The payroll is kind of the biggest thing they want to see. But the other piece that's kind of been missing is the compliance side, right? Everything I mentioned about, okay, your payroll is classified, all that's good. But for those who are not your W-2 employees, we need to make sure that they have their own workers' compensation insurance.
Mhm.
Typically, how this was done is you would collect COIs from those subs. A lot of times there's a lot of back and forth between them, the broker, trying to get the limits right, adding on certain endorsements. That is what TradeGuard handles end to end. So now when you combine the two of these, Hourly is handling the payroll, the classification. TradeGuard is handling the collection of all the COIs, the back and forth between the sub, the GC, and the broker, resolving any discrepancies. So at the end of the year, you have the whole package that's needed bundled up, which essentially what this does is you know, it makes this premium almost bulletproof in that you have everything you need ready to go. And hopefully, what this ultimately does is lower your risk profile in the eyes of the carrier. If you're somebody who's using Hourly and you're using TradeGuard and you're using them together, you are a much, much more reliable risk than a GC who's doing all this on paper and who's doing guesswork. They're not verifying certificates of insurance. And so I just want to lay that out. That is where the power of this comes together. We'll kind of close it out there. We covered a lot of topics. Anything else you want to add, Will? I mean, I guess what did you think when how for context how this came about? I was talking with one of our carrier partners. The carrier said you should talk to Will over at Hourly. I think there could be a conversation there. Talk to
Mhm.
Will. We were like, okay, there's actually opportunity for something deeper. And so spent the past 2 months kind of fleshing out the details of what this looks like
Yeah.
and kind of inked the deal within the past couple weeks.
Yeah, no, it's great, man. I mean, I saw the promise in it when you spoke specifically to the risk and compliance for the contractors, and that's, a majority of our base of our clients are contractors. And I'm like, this could be something interesting, and I brought it to the uppers and they said, I think this is interesting. And next thing you know, here we are. We're on a podcast talking about the partnership. So it's super cool. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a great partnership.
Absolutely. Will, where can people find you? Whether it's LinkedIn, email, just give the people that want to reach out to you,
Yeah.
where can they reach out?
Absolutely. I mean, you can call me directly. I'm not shy. You got my cell phone number. It's 480-628-8890, 24/7. I'm always available to my clients or prospects looking for different options or just have questions in general. You can also email me at will.accomando@hourly.io. I'm sure my name for spelling will probably be in the podcast title. So you can look there. Yeah, those are the easiest ways. And I can go over everything with them. We set up a call. I'll show them the system. We really look at what do you do? What do you want to do? And we see how we can get there.
Beautiful. Will, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was a pleasure being on, buddy.
Bye, everybody.